They told me I was ridiculous, that I'd fail, that I was an embarrassment to the family. And when it happened again, loud, public, unforgiving, the room tilted and the floor dropped away. I walked out with a bag of notebooks, a spare bottle of water, and a stubborn flame that refused to go out. That was the night I learned what a life looks like when you choose a dream over comfort, when you pick soil and seeds over the well-worn path everyone can walk. Pain sliced through me like winter wind, but I kept walking. That night, I didn't just leave a house. I left a history of whispered judgment, old loyalties weighed down by fear, and a certainty that the world would never understand why I woke up thinking in roots and petals. The past tried to call me back with every family holiday, every shared memory of perfect Sunday dinners and perfectly predictable futures. But the more they mocked, the more I felt the truth pulse in me. A plant-based pharmaceutical future wasn't quaint. It was necessary. It wasn't an archaic fantasy. It was a map to heal what had long been treated as expendable. The years that followed were quiet and loud at the same time. I earned a degree in biochem. Yes, the hard, expensive way. I fought for funding against the sneers that plant-based medicine would never work, against editors who asked me to tone it down. For a world that preferred quick fixes and synthetic miracles, I traveled to endangered forests, listening to the slow languages of ecosystems that refused to hurry for my gain. I learned to read the land like a patient reads a chart, where the soil held water, where the canopy exhaled relief, where the roots whispered of disease before the medicine could even appear in a vial. Public dismissal by peers had felt like a blade, but it became my wind. They had called my approach archaic, naive, reckless, terms that burned at first and then sharpened me. I learned to translate their contempt into a stubborn discipline. I'd stand before a lab bench at dawn and tell myself what I tell a frightened student. Give your hands a chance to learn the truth your fear can't contain. And slowly, stubbornly, something miraculous began. The discovery of medicines grown from endangered flora. Organic compounds that spoke the language of healing without the toxic echoes of synthetic shortcuts. Not a single miracle, just a series of small, relentless victories that stacked up into something undeniable. The breakthrough came on a day I almost missed. A patient with a stubborn autoimmune flare-up, a disease that had danced along the edge of hope for years, found relief after a therapy grown from leaves that had once existed solely in the margins of memory. The relief wasn't loud. It didn't crash through the room like a parade. It was a quiet, persistent kind of healing, like a forest regenerating after fire, waves of improvement that moved through the body and then settled, making room for more life to breathe. That moment wasn't the climax. It was the first clear note of an entire symphony I was only beginning to write. The field expanded in ways I hadn't anticipated. My work began to change landscapes too. We designed a program to rewild barren plots, turning them into thriving ecosystems that supported the same edible, medicinal plants I studied. Villages that once endured drought began to drink from streams that ran clearer than they had in decades. Scientists who had once dismissed my papers came to study the fields I'd planted and the medicines we'd harvested, fields where every plant told a story of resilience and companionship with the soil. The science wasn't a solo act. Then came the moment I dreaded most, and the moment I'd waited for with the same breath. I returned home. Not to a welcome party, but to a house still haunted by the old judgments, the old laughter that felt like a bricked-up doorway to my future. I stood in the doorway and watched as the land behind the house breathed anew. A hillside stitched with native trees, a stream that ran clear as glass, a garden that wore the colors of health in its leaves and petals. I wasn't wearing a lab coat. I wore the quiet confidence of someone who could explain the world without begging for permission. The defining scene was not a victory scream, but a revelation. My sister, who had once chronicled my ridiculous choices with a sarcasm that could sour fruit, stood at the edge of a clearing where a family plot had long sat fallow. She watched as a team of agronomists demonstrated a field trial, a line of plants that looked ordinary until they released a scent so rich it filled the air with the memory of rain. The plants stood tall and unafraid, and in their shade a harvest of medicines grew, not in glass vials alone, but in the very soil where they rooted. The camera captured the moment we all looked at the same thing. What I had become was not a stubborn prodigy, not a reckless dreamer, but a living guarantee that a different kind of science could return life to places that had forgotten how to sustain themselves. When the proof registered in their faces, a kind of gravity shifted. My mother, the guardian of the past, leaned into the moment not with anger, but with a soft, almost frightened wonder. My father, who had once puffed out his chest to defend his own choices and then spat out my failures as if they were fertilizer, looked at me with something that almost passed for awe. They could not deny what their own eyes witnessed. The daughter they had dismissed as a nuisance had built an economy of healing from the ground up. She had reimagined their land as a living library of remedies and renewal. There came a question in their silence, a quiet admission that stung and released all at once. What had they done to make room for a dream they could never have imagined? I did not scold them, not then. Karma's ledger is fierce, yes, but it is not a ledger to punish forever. It is a ledger to teach how to become better, how to become capable of offering the world something it did not know it needed until the hour it asked for it. I offered them a future, not a verdict. I invited them to walk the fields with me, to learn the stories of the roots, the leaves, the pollen that carried life from one village to another. If they chose to accept the invitation, they would become part of a story bigger than any one person's pride. In the days that followed, we shared meals on the veranda and watched the light slide over newly planted rows. I explained the medicines, the trials, the careful ethics that kept people safe while we healed the land. They listened, sometimes with tears that surprised them as much as they surprised me. And when the conversations turned to the old days, what they had said, how they had laughed, I did not pretend the hurt wasn't there. I simply said that healing, real healing, requires both stubborn courage and generous patience. Their laughter did not erase my persistence. It became a distant echo, a warning of what can happen when fear or insecurity masquerades as truth. I learned through a long particular grace that karma's ledger isn't about revenge. It's about alignment. When a life finds its true frequency, the world tunes to it. The medicines I nurtured did not only treat diseases, they rebalanced communities and ecosystems. The land answered with a chorus of birdsong, with streams that carried the memory of rain, with gardens that fed both people and pollinators, and the family, once a chorus of doubt, found a new refrain. Participation in this living project, a shared stewardship of the future. I stand now at the threshold of a broader horizon. The work continues, not as a lone triumph, but as a field of collaboration. Scientists, farmers, healers, and dreamers all working in concert. The dream that was mocked became the instrument of transformation, proof that what seems ridiculous when whispered in a kitchen can become a civilization's lifeline when nurtured with care. And perhaps the most humbling truth I carry is this: the road was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could stand with the earth and speak a language it would listen